Congressman Bill Owens joins us for our first roundtable of the new year. Welcome, nice to have you. Happy New Year.
Happy to be here and Happy New Year.
You're heading back to work this week as we're taping midweek here. What's first on the agenda?
Well, there's a couple of things I think that are going to be up this week. Hopefully the Farm Bill we'll see some action on. I think the Senate is going to vote on the extending unemployment benefits. Whether that makes it to the House or not is a little unclear. But I do think that we will see in the next 2 weeks probably the two biggest pieces of legislation we need to get done right away, and that is the Farm Bill and then an omnibus appropriations bill.
What's in the Farm Bill that's so important for the North Country?
Well, clearly the Dairy Security Act is extraordinarily important for the North Country, as is the SNAP renewal. The food stamps are a very, very important impactor on our communities. We have lots of people who need the assistance from food stamps, whether you're talking about kids, whether you're talking about senior citizens, or veterans. Significant pooling of people in those three groups. And then there is the impact in the community to reductions in food stamps. In essence, the small grocery stores, the large grocery stores, all are impacted by people who have less food stamps to spend.
Farmers would also like to see changes where their migrant farmhands can stay longer than one season.
Right.
That's still part of the immigration bill, and what's the status?
Still part of the immigration bill. The House is talking about bringing some smaller bills, piecemeal as they suggest, which would address things like the DREAM Act, farm labor, and potentially high-tech labor. Interesting to see how that plays out. There really is nothing from my perspective that indicates we'll see much on that before February. We clearly need to get through the omnibus bill, we need to get through the Farm Bill, we need to get through this unemployment issue, and clearly we need to get through the debt ceiling issue. Those are four fairly big and significant and somewhat controversial pieces of legislation. So I think we won't see much action on the Farm Bill until we on the immigration bill, do we get through those four?
And is it possible that the part that would be so important to the farmers up here could end up being stripped out?
Unfortunately, I think it could. The issue you really have is that, excuse me, if you bring piecemeal legislation, at what point does that legislation move back to the Senate for a conference with the Senate bill? Now, if you took one piece of legislation and moved it back immediately, well, maybe we could see some action much more quickly. I doubt that's going to happen. I think that what's going to actually happen is the House will pass piecemeal legislation, maybe 2 or 3 bills like I discussed before, and then send those to the Senate. Then the Senate has to decide whether or not it's going to act on those. My guess is, given the fact that the Senate has passed a very extensive bill, that they probably wouldn't even bring those up to a vote. So how we get enough pieces of legislation to get us to a conference is a little unclear to me.
Also, February is the next likely deadline for raising the debt ceiling. Do you think with the budget being passed last month in December, the budget deal, do you think that it won't go to the brink this time around, or are we looking at another showdown like we saw that shut down the government back in October over raising the debt ceiling again?
I think that we'll have a much better idea on that. I think that, as you know, the budget deal passed with about 150, 160 Republican votes and about the same number of Democratic votes. We need to see the Farm Bill and the omnibus appropriations bill passed by those same kinds of numbers again, so that we all have confidence that the other side of the aisle is going to vote for reasonable things. If that happens, then I think the likelihood of the debt ceiling creating a crisis lessens dramatically. If that doesn't happen, if we revert to pre-budget deal voting numbers, then I think we may be in for the same kind of a rough ride.
You mentioned the extension of the unemployment benefits. Senate likely taking that up this week. In the House, is there support for that?
Well, it depends on which side of the aisle you're on. My sense is that it seems unlikely to me that you'll be able to get a standalone extension of unemployment insurance passed in the House. I do think that it may well get incorporated, however, into the omnibus funding bills. So if that happens, the result may be delayed a little bit, but in fact, I think if there's an opportunity to get unemployment insurance extended, it's through the omnibus legislation.
And where are you on this?
Well, I would clearly vote for it, particularly in the omnibus, because we have a few more dollars to spend now under the budget deal. We could allocate some of those dollars to this, and then we get around the whole question of whether or not you have to cut something else.
And of course, which is what some Republicans want. They're saying we may go along with this, but we want the equal amounts or more in spending cuts. Always the opponents will and critics will say that as the economy is recovering, now is not the time to necessarily extend unemployment benefits. Now is not the time to be talking about raising the minimum wage. Both of those issues seem to be going hand in hand, and people are saying it may not be the right time with the economy recovering to do that.
Well, I think that depends on whether or not you're one of the people that's out of work.
About 1 million or so Americans?
1 million or so Americans who are going to lose benefits.
Who are going to lose their benefits.
Who are going to lose their benefits. So we know this is a significant number of people still out of work. One of the reasons for that is that the economy has changed, and there is a large skills gap, meaning people who, the jobs that are available, and there's about 4 million jobs that are available, people don't have the skills to fill those jobs. So from my perspective, we should be doing two things. We certainly should be supporting those people who are losing their unemployment, but more importantly, we should be doing things to retrain those folks so that they can fill those unfilled jobs. In our district, there's about 3 million, about 3,000 unfilled jobs. A very, very significant number. You take and fill those jobs, and suddenly your unemployment rate goes down a point and a half.
At the same time, we're hearing about raising the minimum wage. It sounds as if that's something the president may propose in his State of the Union address. Where are you on raising minimum wage?
Well, he did last year. He proposed that last year. Obviously, not much happened. New York State, as you know, has raised the minimum wage. From my perspective, the only thing you really need to do is to make sure you protect those very small businesses with some form of a tax credit. If you can do that, then I think you can get this done. However, I think there's a larger issue here, and that is that even if you raise the minimum wage, you really haven't pushed people above the poverty line. We really need to do a major revamp of all of the programs that provide assistance to people to get them above the poverty level. And I think a larger analysis needs to be done. There's a number of people who believe that the Earned Income Tax Credit is a better vehicle for assisting people to get out of poverty. And I think we need to be looking at all of those things as we go through this analysis, because I think that the minimum wage increase is a short-term minimum fix. Excuse the pun, but it is that. It doesn't really get to the core problem. And the core problem, in my view, is making sure you're pulling people out of poverty and at the same time getting them back into the workforce. And for that, they need to have the skill sets to do that.
Short term, you do support raising it?
Yes.
How much?
I'm very comfortable with where New York is on that. I think the governor's done a good job again in that area. He's got some tax credits that are looped into his bill, and I think that that's a sensible approach.
$850 or so, and then up to $925 over the next year and
Correct.
a half, 2 years.
Yep.
There are some who are suggesting that as far as the federal level, that it go much higher, $10 an hour.
I think that that whole issue is one of those that, in my view, is best left to the states. And I think that states like New York have done a good job. And I would prefer to leave it in the hands of local folks who understand their local economies.
Obamacare. Mm-hmm. Has it cleared a big hurdle? The aside from the issues with the website and the rollout, now are the numbers enough that you think this program is going to work? Or with about 2.1 million signing up so far, is that not enough to start saying here's proof that we're getting the people to sign up for it?
Couple of issues there. First of all, I don't think it's a large enough number. Secondly, we don't know the demographics in the number. do we have enough young people in that number to make sure that we're going to be able to hold the premiums level because we have the right mix? I think we're not going to know the answer to this probably till April 1st. How many people have enrolled and what's the demographic mix of those people? If in fact we get into 4 million or so who have signed up, I think that puts the whole program in a different light. And I think hopefully it will cause people then to sit back and say, this program is with us, now what we need to do is work together to fix it and to make it work better so that we achieve the two results that we wanted, which was lower cost and better healthcare outcomes.
The goal was 7 million by the end of March.
Right.
If that isn't reached, do you think it jeopardizes the effectiveness?
No, I don't.
Of the program?
I think if it stayed at 2 million, that's a significant issue. If it goes to 4 or 5, I think then you're in the ballpark where you know you're trending correctly and you probably can assume that much of the delay in getting people to sign up was all of the hiccups that occurred with the website. And clearly that was a rollout that was done very, very poorly.
It sounds as if Republicans have given up, at least for now, on trying to repeal it altogether. But clearly this appears to be one of the, if not the, campaign issue of 2014.
Clearly, I think it will be. I don't think there's any question about that, but I think that conversation will change, again, depending upon how many people have enrolled. I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to say, repeal it if you've got 4 or 5 million people who are now covered. And if it's continuing to trend through 2014 to get closer to that 7 million number, then I think the conversation has to change to how do we make it better? How do we make it fairer?
With so many registered Republicans in your district, though, is this a campaign issue that's going to be a tough one for you?
I think if I was in a state other than New York, that might be the case. But I think in New York, the governor and his health and insurance departments have done an outstanding job of putting this together. It's largely working. Are there some people who are unhappy with it? Obviously there are, but I'm not sure that that represents the bulk of the population, whether they be Democrats, Republicans, or independents.
Senate Republicans are going to hold hearings on it. They're raising a number of issues about it, but you think overall New York rolled out its exchange and that things have gone
I think
well
they've done extremely well. I was at a gathering over the holidays. A person asked me a question. I sent it down to a person I have contact with at the state exchange. Within 24 hours, I had an answer to a fairly complex question. And it was a clear answer. So they're really on top of it. They're responsive, and they've got control of the information, and they're able to disseminate it effectively.
Speaking of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo this week announced effectively by executive order creating a medical marijuana program here in New York through hospitals. As it becomes more and more common among policy issues and debates in this country, marijuana now with it legal to possess and use in Colorado, a growing number of states authorizing medical marijuana, a number of states, including Vermont, decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana. Do you think that it'll get to a point where we're going to see this become a conversation that Congress has and an issue that Congress takes up as far as coming up with a national policy in many regards to marijuana?
I'd be very surprised in the short term if Congress takes that up. I think what we're more likely to see is the process that's gone on where the federal government has largely kind of looked the other way on the issue of medical marijuana. And that makes sense to me. The medical use of marijuana, like many, many other substances, I think makes sense. The program the governor is proposing to distribute it through hospitals also makes sense. They have pharmacies in the hospitals that are very heavily regulated. So this is a structure that allows for this to happen utilizing the controls that are necessary to make sure that only those folks who fit in this defined category of medical need will receive it.
You probably can't see Congress taking up a question whether to legalize it
I
in the
would
foreseeable future.
I do not see that happening in the foreseeable future.
What about the decriminalization, though? Certainly the federal government, like many states, has paid billions and billions of dollars in prosecuting and locking up marijuana users. Do you perhaps see decriminalization?
I don't see an outright action to decriminalize. I think what you're going to see is a sort of a continued de-emphasis by the federal government of those kinds of legal actions. I'm not suggesting that they're not going to go after the large growers, the large distributors, that are people that are making huge sums of money off this. But I do think that for the local person who may be in possession of some de minimis level of marijuana, I think they're going to largely start to turn a blind eye to that. Again, that makes sense. I don't think the country is ready for that kind of a conversation. We have enough issues we need to get through, and I think that that's something for a later day.
New York, one of 6 states that the government has picked now as testing sites for drones. Fort Drum will be part of that. Also, Old Griffiths Air Force Base and Syracuse. Do you, and this is the FAA requiring, I think it wants to have by 2015 guidelines when it comes to drone use. Do people need to worry about, if we're a testing area in upstate New York and the North Country, that we're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of drones flying around?
I don't envision the Jetsons occurring in northern New York. I think what you have to understand is that the FAA has designated flight zones for this testing. It just so happens that if you take the triangle that comes from Griffiths to Syracuse to Fort Drum, you have a lot of open space in the Adirondacks that also is not heavily traveled by commercial airlines. So it's a perfect spot in which to do that. And they're trying to test the drones, how they interact with other aircraft. And I think it makes a great deal of sense to do that. I don't think you're going to see hundreds, and probably not even dozens of drones in the air at any one time. And most of that activity, if not all of it, will be confined to that triangle.
So not widespread flights over the Adirondack Park?
You're not going to see widespread flights spying on people fishing.
Drones are already being used by Customs and Border Patrol.
Absolutely. They fly up and down the northern border, very focused on, utilizing technology that allows them to spot people moving back and forth across the border, and then to bring in land forces when that happens. But the border is an immense area. Many of the places inaccessible. So I think utilizing drones makes a lot of sense.
And New York wanted to get in on the testing because they believe that potentially could lead to jobs and an industry basically designing these drones for the future.
Right, designing them, doing the work of preparing them, of building them, of repairing them. It opens up almost every portion of that industry to potential development in New York.
And we don't know how soon. Do you share the vision of Jeff Bezos that the day could be coming when our Amazon packages will be delivered by drones to our doorsteps?
I don't think that's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years.
As Congress heads back, obviously the NSA is a concern. Are we expecting that the House, along with the Senate, is going to take a look at possible reforms?
Clearly, I think that there have already been some bills offered in that respect. As somebody who did not vote for renewal of the Patriot Act, nor the renewal of the FISA courts, I am very interested in seeing some additional controls imposed. But one of the other things that really troubles me and has not been answered to date, when Snowden did all this downloading, it's very clear that NSA didn't know he did it and didn't know the volume that he took with him, because they still can't define how much he took. So every time there's a disclosure, they appear surprised. That to me is not a particularly strong indication that they have adequate controls in place. If they don't have adequate controls in place, that means two things. One, someone else could do this, and number two, the system can be abused. So from my perspective, those are the things I want to see. I want to see addressed. The larger question of how they go about doing this metadata and what implications it has for the Fourth Amendment is a very complex question. How you balance security with privacy rights is an ongoing, if you will, battle that moves back and forth on either side of that center line. So my perspective, I think we need to be doing some investigation. I think we need more information. And we need to have NSA come forward with a plan. They're the people who have the expertise. They should be coming forward to us and saying, we recognize these issues, here's how we're going to address them.
When you say that you oppose the extension of the Patriot Act, were you envisioning the very type of problems that are
my major
have come to light
concern,
now?
yes, my major concern was that I wasn't envisioning the Snowden problem, but I was envisioning the Fourth Amendment issues.
Gun control. Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was in the Saratoga area a few months back last fall, and at the time had talked about possibly taking a number of the components of the New York SAFE Act and trying to extend that across the country. Are we likely to see any proposals for further gun control before Congress this new year, or did that play out last year and it's unlikely that you're going to see anything additional coming forward?
I don't see anything coming forward, which is I think why the President a couple of days ago announced some executive order changes, which in reviewing them made sense to me in terms of how you define someone who may lack the mental capacity to be a gun owner. I think that made some sense, and we haven't heard a lot of pushback on that. At least I haven't seen much in the media about that issue. I think that that's one of those areas where we're not going to see further action by Congress.
And expanded background checks, probably not.
I don't think we'll see any significant legislation coming out of Congress on that.
All right. Bill Owens, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Tom. Sure.